It's the Dearly Departed podcast, featuring your hosts, historian Scott Michaels and filmmaker Mike Dorsey.
Okay, welcome everybody. It is crazy times. So we figure here in America with the election and everything happening, so we figured why not take a trip to the land of Oz.
Yeah, please, let's go, you know.
If there's ever a time when you want to be somewhere else and have a little escapism, it's right now, I think. So let's have, the fantasy of the Wizard of Oz world. So we are, just as a housekeeping note here, we are not going to do the kind of obituaries of the week or deaths of the week that we normally do. We are going to make those now our Patreon shows. So if you want to subscribe to our Patreon, you can get all of that stuff. We just recorded it. We talked about Sean Connery and Eddie Van Halen and a bunch of other really cool people that we unfortunately have lost over the past couple of months. So that's over on our Dearly Departed Patreon. But so we're going to focus more on just the main shows for our regular, free show that we put out. And but we do still have some general stuff to talk about before we get into our main topic. So, Scott, you did something with Zach Bagans recently. I saw you post
it. Yeah. We had,
what can you say about it?
I can say, well, actually, I could probably say anything. It's the pictures that there would be a problem, and any of the content. So yeah, we did an investigation at the Cecil Hotel.
Oh, wow.
They had complete run of the place.
Oh my gosh.
It was surprising because the Cecil, for those of you that don't know, it's pretty notorious. It was sort of based, the American Horror Story hotel season was sort of based on the Cecil. Over the years, many horrific events have happened in there. Most notably, more recently, about 5 years ago or more, a little bit more, there was a young woman named Elisa Lamb who was in the elevator, and there was some really bizarre security footage about her in the elevator. It looked like she was talking to someone when no one was there, and she ended up dying mysteriously. So, it was a fascinating time. Having run at the Hotel,
wow.
I know so-and-so stayed in this room. We went up there, and it was like a gigantic, it was like watching Laughing, all these little doors and windows opened up, and we were able to go in all the rooms and talk about what happened to them. So it was pretty fascinating. Yeah, it was
the
wild.
Cecil's had a lot of stuff over the years, people jumping out of windows, it's kind of up and down with its, it's been seedy at times, certainly. And that girl, she was, I believe, a Chinese-Canadian citizen, and they found her in the water tank on the roof. But it was ruled an accidental death, that she had a history of mental illness. But that video of her on the elevator was so weird and creepy, where she thought she was acting paranoid, and she was looking out, and then a lot of people thought that there was a ghost related thing, and they thought that they saw her hair get touched at one point in it. I remember that. I remember following the story really closely, and then they found her body in a water tower, which unfortunately had been supplying water to the building and the coffee shop downstairs the whole time. Yeah. You can imagine.
And they were literally, this water tastes a little funny. Oh, there's a funky smell in this. Yeah, that's
this water tastes like people. Ugh.
Yeah. It was wild. So it was really fascinating. I mean, and when you say people jump off the roof, so a lot of times people will say, like people jump off the Hollywood sign. Well, one did,
Right.
But when you say people jumped off the roof, many people jumped out of the hotel. Yeah. I don't know. It was, I think that hotel is really bad news. I think it's up there with Benedict Canyon, some kind of bizarre little portal kind of thing, if you believe in that kind of thing, and I do. It was a fascinating night.
It's also one of those places that's kind of a last rung kind of place. At certain times throughout its existence, it was kind of, if you were there, you were kind of at the end of the line to some extent. So maybe
originally it was their little single room occupancy. They're tiny little rooms, and with a sink and a toilet and a shower. They were built for workmen. I think the railroads were nearby, and that's why it was originally built. And it became this sort of flop house. Really, it's in Skid Row, and it was a hostel for a long time too. There are still residents there. One floor is still residential, but the rest of the hotel is completely empty. And I think that's why Ghost Adventures was able to use it because, and up until this point, because of Elisa Lam and all the publicity, the hotel was like, no, nothing. Anyone walks in the doors with a camera, no way. And but now things are empty, and they're like,
that's amazing that they let them in there, though. That's really freaking cool.
Yeah.
That neighborhood, though, has kind of been on the upswing a little bit. There's some nice lofts in that area. I've come across it a couple times just on accident. Oh, really? Because I know some people that live in lofts kind of down in that area. Oh, okay. Okay.
Maybe a couple of blocks away, but no. I mean, we were literally, rats were running in front of us, and it was good. Not good. No.
Speaking of maybe the pandemic has been hard on that section of town. Speaking of haunted things, I for the past couple of months have been producing some things over at the American Horror Story house, which I saw you post a picture of your van in front of a couple of days ago. But I was there. I filmed some reenactments and some documentary stuff there last month, or kind of September, October. Yeah. And then they did a 3-day live stream event, or a 3-night event, 29th, 30th, and 31st, and I was there producing camera crew for that.
Wow, cool.
That event, the last 3 nights.
A couple of people I know were involved in that. That's really cool.
Right on.
Wow, yeah. I would like to. That would have been interesting to see. The inside of that. It's interesting how the owners have embraced, the reputation of that. All of a sudden, it's very haunted, but before.
Well, they. What's interesting is they put a kind of a trailer out, so this is public now. But they bought the house, and they're both Europeans. The wife is from England, and her husband's German. He's a German doctor. They obviously they live here now, but they were not aware of. They did not know the show. They'd never seen the show before. And I don't know so much if they were aware that the show existed or not, but they did not know that how many fans show up at that house every day. And it is crazy, Scott. Dozens and dozens. Every time you look out the window, there's people out in front of the house on the street looking at it.
This time of year especially.
It's constant.
Yeah.
Speaking of houses that are big attractions, and Zach, again, kind of everything coming together here, he bought the La Bianca house last year or earlier this year, I guess, planning to do something, and he and I talked about doing something, and he has decided not to do something with it, and is just listed it for sale this past week. And I mean, I will be surprised if is still standing. Or still
I agree. I had hope for it when he bought it. I had a feeling that it might stay, but it's interesting because the whole time Zach bought it, it was empty for a few months before he bought it, and up until about a month ago, it looked like hell. Like they cut the lawn once during that whole time, and now when it's back up for sale again, it's all nicely manicured lawns and stuff like that, so it's looking good again. But and also it went up $200,000 since Zach bought it.
Amazing.
He bought it for 2, and now it's 2.2. So, but that's a real. It's a real. I mean, I don't want to live in a murder house. I have no desire to live in a murder house.
Right.
But I would buy that house just to make sure it stayed because it's such an important part of our history here.
Yeah.
And what I do.
Unfortunately for it's a small house on a huge piece of property. And a prime piece of property. It's on a ridge line it goes on both sides of the ridge line. It's a very large lot, and it's a very small kind of, if not for the history of it, kind of a dumpy little house for the property.
House too. It's got it's all falling apart. It is. It's in it's a really terrible shape. Shape. Yeah.
So
it's
probably not going to survive, or at the very least will be heavily renovated, but probably just torn down because it's way too small for the lot that it's on. So it's a bummer. But that's progress for you. We talked about Elvis's grandson committing suicide on one of our last shows, and he has now been buried at the family plot at Graceland.
Mm-hmm. Benjamin Storm Presley Keogh is what it says on his gravestone, on his tombstone.
Who looked shockingly like his grandfather. Really resembled him, and he committed suicide, I think, on his birthday. With locked himself in a bathroom, and while everybody was outside it and trying to talk him out of it, and he shot himself. And then another thing, I saw you got another piece of Jane Mansfield's jewelry.
Oh yeah, a buddy of mine, my friend Harry, sent me a brooch that was Jane's that he gifted his mother probably 30 years ago, and his mother since passed away, and he's like, well, I have this thing now. She loved it. What do I do with it? So Harry gave it to me. So one day when we open our museum again, I'll have this on display. And I don't think I talked about it the last time, but we had I got a call or an email from someone saying, "Do you want the sink from Lucy's house? It's from her beauty salon." I'm like, sure. So it is the sink that was in Lucy's house where she had her hair done, because it has a little dip in it, like a salon sink. And it was sitting in the ruins of that house when they gutted it. It was empty for about 6-7 years after she died.
Yeah.
And so he grabbed it. He figured one day he's going to make a bird bath out of it or something, and never transpired. So he asked me if I wanted it. I said, sure, I'll be right there. So I went over, and he gave me a couple of Lucy's credit cards. And a gas station card that says Lucille Ball on it. It's really wild. But it's funny, I was doing a little bit of research about Lucy, and I just happened to Google something about Lucy and her hair and her house. And she and Vivian Vance show up on a talk show, Dinah Shore, talking about how one day they were in the in Lucy's salon. They were both getting their hair done. They both had the peroxide or the dye on their hair. And they were sitting there with their nails, their toes all set up and being pedicured. And this tour group walks through the house. And they're sitting there with all this crap all over their bodies, and they come in, and it's so funny, it's so un-PC now. But she said, he was the king of Siam, and the women, and they had the costumes and the whole thing in the middle of the forehead. It was like, oh wow, times have changed. But yeah, so it was cool to get this chunk of Lucy's house, which is and I have a little jar of her hair dye too, so it just completes the picture. Yeah, so it's kind of cool.
You can put it next to Karen Carpenter's sink from her Century City apartment while you're at it.
We've got the sinks, we've got people's doors, we've got death cars. I've got
you could build a whole house out of other people's stuff.
And hair. I've got lots of celebrity hair.
That's hilarious. And Jane Mansfield, do you still have her suitcase?
No.
You return that?
Anymore.
I was going to say pretty soon you're just going to own everything she used to own. You keep
I would like something that she wore. I really would. That would be cool to have something nice of hers instead of something awful. Well, the brooch is very nice.
Hate mail. You said we don't really have any hate mail. We did get a really nice note though from a new Patreon subscriber named Paul. Thanking us for the show, and he brought up an interesting point. He's been very into 60s television shows, and he said that it seemed like back then there were a lot of actors who were kind of like professional TV guest stars, right? Guys like Jack Cassidy would probably be a good example of that. Guys who kind of made a living at that, and he wondered, is there anybody like that today? Any actors like that today that kind of seem to make that kind of a living? And I can't think of anybody that I know the name of.
No, it's so different now because, back then we had 3 networks. Again, we talked about that before.
Sure.
And now we've got, 150 channels, and they're pumping out the shit all the time.
So who even remembers the same face if you see it a few times, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's the guy from The Thing, I know, I know that face.
Right.
But very rarely anymore because there's just so many people. And but before, you're right, it was like Jack Cassidy was one. There was an actress named Joanna Pettit who was friends with Sharon Tate, who had that whole look. Same as Sharon Tate. There was... oh my gosh, there's so many, and now I can't think of them off the top of my head. But,
maybe we should do a show on 60s TV character actors or guest stars.
Not main players.
That would be kind of fun, actually. Yeah, that would be really fun. Like Jack Cassidy's a great story. That'd be a great one to start with.
Yeah, Sandra Gould, she was Mrs. Kravitz. She was in a ton of stuff. Rita Shaw was another one. She was in Ghost of Mrs. Muir, and she's in a ton the Ghost of Mr. Chicken. Oh my God, there's so many. Yeah. You can go mental with that stuff. All those witches on Bewitched. You know what I mean? They were all like, all the Aunt Hagatha, was Hermione Gingold, who was this amazing actress, and there's so many people like that. Yeah, Morris Evans, who played the father, was in Rosemary's Baby. He was in a ton of stuff. So yeah,
right. So, anyways,
Good
thank
idea.
you, Paul. We like mail also as much as we like hate mail. So
Yeah, there's plenty of awful things people say, but it's funny because like the longer you do stuff online, the more immune you get to that. Occasionally there'll be a zing right under the fingernails. You go, you wake up and you're kind of groggy. All of a sudden it's like bam, and it's like, and I'm really good about typing out replies and then deleting them and not posting them because I think, what is this going to do? What is this going to do? Is this going to make me feel better? Probably, but not necessary. So I am pretty good about that. But it's mostly, this Marilyn Monroe video that I did with the interview with the guy that embalmed her or helped embalm her, and he took her falsies. Oh my God, the comments on that are just outrageous.
I'm sure the Marilyn Monroe fans.
That video has almost 2 million views. So I'm like, all right, like, keep complaining. I don't care.
You're laughing all the way to the YouTube bank.
Rolling in it.
So you had a crazy thing happen in your neighborhood recently, and this was kind of seemed almost reminiscent of the guy. Remember the guy that murdered the old screenwriter and then got arrested trying to get into Paramount?
Yeah.
Remember that story?
Yeah, Robert Lees. Yeah.
So something crazy happened at Paramount again this past week.
Yeah, I mean, the last few months, it's been pretty crazy on, the Citizen app is what I have, and you get alerts of anything that happened within a mile of you. And we talked about this before, how there's a lot of BS, people like a woman in a flamingo costume running down the street, the kind of stuff. It's just a lot of bullshit that people put up there. But this one, we were sitting, Troy and I were watching TV, and all of a sudden, the helicopter started. No, actually, we heard the gunshots first. And we both looked at it because that was gunshots. And then they must have been on him. They were, actually, because then there were about 20 cop cars within minutes. And then the helicopter came. So it turns out it was a pursuit. He was from Fullerton, and the cops were after him. And they parked over on Melrose. This guy parked on Melrose and ran into the Paramount lot. And he was hiding on the back lot for like an hour. So it was, man, we like 2 hours later, we had to go to bed. And it was just so loud. It's like my whole place was vibrating because of the copters were so low. It was a crazy night, but it's just another night in Hollywood.
He thought he could lose him on the lot.
Yeah.
Speaking of Paramount lot, did you see that they just had a Robert Evans auction?
Yeah.
And
well,
stuff.
I sure would have liked to have got something, man.
Good Lord, it was so expensive though. Like it seemed like everything exceeded expectations by a lot.
It surprises me, too, because Evans is sort of off the radar to people that aren't in the movie business or the film business or whatever. He's like a L.A. cult hero. And a lot of people not in L.A. don't know who he is.
It's not like it was like a Brando auction or something like that, like a big name like that to the general public. Like his Godfather script sold for tons of money. His name lettering that was on his office in Paramount went for just a ton of money, these metal letters that spelled out his name. I mean, it's crazy how much.
That's the one thing I would have liked. Is if I could have afforded to bid on anything, it would have been that the letters from the front door or the front of his office. That would have been really cool. But I did see him once doing an opening talk about the Marathon Man. He came out and introduced it, and that was pretty cool. I wanted to meet him so bad, just so I could say, hey, Mr. Evans, thanks for saving Paramount. And I don't want to say what a scumbag he is, he's such a lech. But I mean, he was just a playboy and of the ilk of Hugh Hefner and who I'm fond of too. But if they didn't do what they did, they would just be other scuzzy old men. If they weren't, if he didn't save Paramount, or if Hugh Hefner didn't create Playboy, they would have just been lecherous old men. Instead, they're successful businessmen.
And, we got The Kid Stays in the Picture, which is, I haven't read the book, but the documentary is probably my favorite doc on Hollywood ever. I love that.
Yeah, the book on tape is fantastic. Yeah.
Oh, did he read it?
Yeah, I have, the CD. I read the book, but I got the him reading his own story is really good.
Right. Because that's kind of, he narrates his documentary too, so that would be really interesting to hear the whole book that way.
He's so noir, you know. He's like, yeah, kid, you know.
Right.
Love you, kid. You hang in there, you know. What a life! What a life I had.
I think I've told this story before, but I'll just really quickly. A big name producer that I worked for briefly years ago told me about a story. He had a meeting at Robert Evans's house once to do a business meeting, but it was held in Robert Evans's master bedroom suite, which coincidentally they just sold his bed in that auction. But he said it was so weird because there was like a wall of tapes of like his Johnny Carson appearances and all this other stuff that he'd done, and he had an assistant there, and he was such a narcissist. It was just all talking about himself, and he would start to say, yeah, that time I was on Carson in 1985. Hey, you know what? Get the tape. And you'd sit there and watch his appearance with him on Carson.
Oh, my God.
My
God.
And then he'd start talking about something else. He'd be like, you know what? Get the tape. And you'd sit and you were like, oh, my God, dude. Like, reliving the glory days, you know? Like, I want to talk about this project. So, anyways. And the person that told me this story was like the biggest narcissist I've ever known. So for him to say that Robert Evans was like whacked out like that, that's saying something. So,
that's funny.
Anyways, he did some great things. And like you said, he saved Paramount and took it from like number 10 to like number 1, basically, in the studio system. So, all right, the main event.
It's time for the main feature.
So, The Wizard of Oz, based on the books by L. Frank Baum. He ended up writing 14 books in all in the series starting in 1900, and it seems like he didn't really want to write any more books after the first one, but it was such a huge success and the fans were so demanding that he just kept writing them. And that just kind of became his life. And there have been a ton of adaptations that were done before the main one that we all know and love. 1910's The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, 1914's The Patchwork Girl of Oz and His Majesty, The Scarecrow of Oz and The Magic Cloak of Oz. Those were all in 1914, so that was silent era. 1925's The Wizard of Oz and the 1932 sequel, The Land of Oz. So Hollywood was very familiar with adapting his books, and I believe he also lived here, so that helped with making all that happen. But the big one that, of course, we all know and love is MGM's 1939 version, often referred to as the most watched film in history because of the television airings that have been done since the 50s. Yeah, and that's
it's described as. I read this. I clipped this article like many years ago, and the plot. Transported to a surreal landscape, a young girl kills the first person she meets, then teams up with 3 strangers to kill again.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
But you're right about L. Frank Baum. He lived over on, I think it was Cherokee and
he
Yucca,
lived like in the middle of Hollywood.
Yucca. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And that's where I forget what the name of his estate was. He called it, not Oziana, but it was Oscott. That's what he called it, Oscott. Right. And they say that, well, according to legend, he got the name Oz because he was looking at file cabinets, and it was NPOZ, and that's according to Lahr, how he chose the name.
I think that's also according to one of the main Wizard of Oz historians who's written about it a lot. Told that as well, yeah.
Yeah, he did, and he when he died in 1919. He was 62. He had a stroke. He's buried at Forest Lawn, Glendale. But it's interesting because Forest Lawn, Glendale was originally a different cemetery, and the guy name is Hubert Eaton. He established Forest Lawn Memorial Parks. The memorial park meaning stones are flat. Therefore, they're easier to maintain, and it looks like a memorial park rather than a cemetery where the stones are upright. So this small section of Forest Lawn, Glendale, is the old cemetery where L. Frank Baum is buried, and all surrounding it is this whole massive, other memorial park. And they do have this giant mausoleum. There's actually, a few of the Wizard of Oz stars are in that very cemetery.
Oh, wow. So if you're an Oz fan, it's a good cemetery to go visit because you can kind of hit a few at once.
Yeah, in fact, my friend Steve Cox, who we've referred to several times, he wrote a book called The Munchkins of Oz, and he gave me a photograph that was taken when they were filming the movie in early 1939 of the Munchkins visiting Forest Lawn. And because it was a proper tourist attraction, the cemetery was, to see their artwork. So the Munchkins literally went to Forest Lawn and where, L. Frank Baum was buried. Maybe they stopped there to visit him. But it's just a bizarre picture of the Munchkins at the cemetery when they were filming The Wizard of Oz. So yeah, wild. Anyway.
So I figured first we would start with Judy.
Why not?
I mean, one of the most complicated and fascinating personalities in Hollywood history, in my opinion.
And funny lady.
Yes. Gave great interviews.
Yeah, Lucy said, I'm funny on paper, but Judy Garland, she is funny. She told the best stories.
and Liza said in the documentary that I watched, she said that she was, a lot of her stories were tall tales. She liked to kind of pull people's legs, and people would take what she would say as gospel that happened. But she said that we all knew that she was, kind of exaggerating and telling tall tales, to her own amusement.
Yeah, she was famously she actually trashed the Munchkins pretty bad on one of the talk shows. Jack Parr. She said that they were all drunks,
right?
And
everybody laughed. The audience laughed when she said it. Yeah.
And they used to come and pick them up in butterfly nets. The police would, But she was, she was. God, she was funny. There are these tapes that surfaced about 20 years ago, and they're called Judy Speaks. And Judy, at the end of her life, she was told because she gets, she's been chewed up and spat out by people her whole life, taken advantage of. And, a lot of people made money off of her, and she didn't make much money. She died broke. So anyway, Swifty Lazar, the agent, gave her a tape recorder, a reel-to-reel, and said, record your memoirs, and you could publish it, and then you'll have your book. So she had this recorder, and there's probably 5 hours of this that are out on YouTube and stuff like this, of her just sitting and talking. And most of the time she is absolutely, wasted. I mean, she's drunk and she's slurring and she gets really angry, and she talks about, what's really cool about it is that she lets her guard down and she starts naming names of people that screwed her over. And she goes, guy with my TV show, these guys made money. This one, her ex-husband, Sid Luft, she's like, he was a crook. He was a scoundrel. It was fascinating. But then there was those moments where she was completely there. And there's a story that I talk about, and I play this on the tour when she's talking about how, if she died in a plane crash, it'd always be Judy Garland in the headlines, and then for everyone else, see page B18, and she talks about how weird fame is, and she said, I go on the plane and the pilot will come over and say to me, you're as important to me as my children are. And she goes, that's nonsense. My life is much more important than theirs. I don't care who knows it. I mean, and she is laughing at herself when she's saying it. She goes, pure selfishness, I don't care. Sure. But when my number's up, I want a new one, and I have no intention of checking out. And I think that was about 2 years before she died.
Wow.
It's the great Judy Speaks. They're all on YouTube. It's fascinating to sit through. It really is.
Speaking of shortly before she died, did you watch the Judy movie with Renee Zellweger?
I did, yeah.
I really liked it. How did you feel about it?
I thought it was okay. I thought it was all right. I mean, she was really good as Judy Garland. There was but I thought, when they did that movie, 20 years ago called Me and My Shadows that Lorna Luft did, and Judy Davis played Judy Garland, and there was a younger actress that played Judy Garland young, and both of those actresses won Emmys for that movie.
Oh, wow.
And it was spectacular. So that was a really raw Judy Garland. I mean, it was rough, and Renee was good. I thought Renee was very good, but it was all very fluffy. It didn't really get into so much. I think I guess it's been a long time since I've seen it. I don't remember it that well, and that's the problem.
The original one?
I don't remember it that. No, the Renee Zellweger one. I don't remember it that well.
It was pretty raw, man. I mean, it was her at the end. It's kind of the end of the road. She's out of money. She doesn't have a place to stay. She's rolling around in a car with her kid and trying to find she's kind of homeless, trying to find a place to crash. She's down and out. It takes place in '68, the winter of '68, so not long before she died.
Yeah,
June of '69. So it's kind of her at the end, and then she does a bit of a comeback toward a comeback performance at the end where she kind of pulls it all together. But you see how challenging it was for her to keep going.
Yeah,
and how rough things got.
She was a complicated piece of work, and she, famously, well, like a lot of them, like Marilyn was, unpredictable. You couldn't depend on them at all. But when she was in front of an audience, it was like, bam, that was it. That was her life. And that was like, Liza was like that too. Liza, my ex opened up her show for her in London back when she was still with David Guest. It was like the last time she did anything, and it was at the Royal Albert Hall. And we were with her backstage, and she was like, how's she going to pull this together? You know what I mean? It was like, really, this lump of a woman, and I don't mean that in any physical way. I mean, I'm just saying, she wasn't really. It didn't look like she was very, showbiz. And then boom, up went the curtain, and she's came to life. And I think that's what Judy was like. I think she fed off of that.
She's a good example of a child star that was messed up by being a child star. The industry chewed up and spit out. Her drug addiction problems came from that. Weight shamed from when she was a kid. And all that, and put on drugs to pep her up, and then downers to help her sleep, and it's that whole to start that cycle when you're a teenager, basically, and kind of being used and abused. Her the way that Louis B. Mayer treated her at MGM and everything has kind of become lore. But she was born Frances Gumm. She was in a vaudeville family. And what's really cool is that a nice success story of a building that's still there is the hotel that she used to stay in with her mother when she would come out to Hollywood to audition for things. It was called the Hotel Iris. I think now it's the St. Moritz. But it's on Sunset Boulevard at Bronson. And it's still there and still looks very, very similar to how it did back then. It hasn't changed much. So that's kind of cool.
There was a sniper on top of that place a couple of years ago.
What?
Yeah, they've
not
shot
a
down
police sniper, like a bad
that
sniper.
No, real one. That's because it's right across from the old Warner lot too, which is kind of funny. But
sure.
Yeah.
And then there's another really cool building that still is around. Well, there's several, but I worked on the Sony lot for a couple of years, which was the MGM lot back in the day. And the soundstage where they filmed Wizard of Oz is still there, and it's still one of the biggest sound stages in the world. And it's still there, and it's still in regular use. And what's really cool is the school, the MGM school, that all these young actresses and actors were, because you still had to do a certain amount of schoolwork by law. Even when you were filming, and it started out as Louis B. Mayer's dining hall, and then it became the school, and it is a protected landmark on the Sony Pictures lot, protected by the city of Culver City. There's like a plaque there, and it looks very much like it did back then.
That's cool.
So, and
very,
you can,
cool.
A lot of people don't know this because it's not like Universal Studios where everybody knows you can do a tour. You can sign up for a tour of the Sony lot. I think it's like maybe $20, $30, something like that, and it's worth it. And it's kind of one that a lot of people don't know about. So your tour group, the tour groups were usually pretty small, like maybe a dozen people I would see walking around a lot. So that's a kind of a little insider tip when you come to LA to look at things, to look up the Sony Pictures website and sign up for a tour and go tour the lot. Because even though the back lot was torn down back in like the 80s, and is now an old folks retirement community, the main studio lot is still very, very similar to how it was back in the MGM days.
I think, isn't that street lamp from Singing in the Rain still there that Gene Kelly was singing on? Isn't that still there somewhere? I think that was on the back lot still.
And I know that the soundstage that they filmed that on is the building is still there, but it's been converted into more of kind of a post facility, so it's not so much a soundstage anymore. Another cool thing is that most people don't know is there is a secret tunnel at Sony, and I got to go down in it one time. And what's crazy is there is a next to the entrance, there is a Spider-Man poster. At least there was when I lived there, and the eye in the Spider-Man is cut out, and there's a camera in it, so that they can monitor people. Basically security to keep, and what the tunnel was built back when they first had added sound to movies, and Norma Shearer's brother was in the radio business, and Norma Shearer was the big actress at MGM at the time, and her husband was Irving Thalberg, the creative head of MGM under Louis B. Mayer, and So they ended up hiring her brother as their sound guy, because each studio had to figure out their own way. How are we going to do sound with pictures? It's a wild frontier. And the problem was that the recording devices that recorded the sound were too noisy to have in the same place where they were making the pictures. So they had to have the sound recording machines in a different building. And so they dug a tunnel that ran from one of the sound stages into the recording building, and then they ran the sound cables from the sound stage into the separate buildings where the recording devices were. So, and that tunnel is still down there, and a bunch of people going back, generations now have written their names down in the tunnel, and you can, it's really short. You can barely stand upright in it, and it's maybe a couple 100 feet long. And yeah, we got to go down there one day. It was really, really cool. So I don't know if that's on the tour. But
I did that tour once, but it was about 15 years ago. But yeah, they didn't show us that, but we did get to go into a couple of one of the theaters there, but I think that they showed us that lamp post. But that old
cool.
MGM Metro Goldwyn Mayer building, which is I think they even took the letters off of it now. There's a really cool Art Deco Metro Goldwyn Mayer building. I think those letters are gone, and. But anyway, it's a cool lot. And across the street's the Culver Hotel where the Munchkins stayed when they made The Wizard of Oz. And famously, they made that movie with Carrie Fisher and Chevy Chase called Under the Rainbow, which was pretty ridiculous as far as their depiction. But they went with that Judy Garland talk show appearance about the Munchkins having orgies and being arrested. And if I'm correct, I think there were a couple of the real Munchkins in that movie that were in The Wizard of Oz. I think they were. I know there were, like, Billy Barty was in it and people like that, but I think there were maybe one or two Munchkins that ended up in that movie.
So getting back to Judy, she died on June 22nd, 1969, accidental overdose of barbiturates. She was 47 years old. And what do you have to say about that?
Well, she had a habit, like Liza does, of marrying gay men. And I think Sid Luft was the only guy she married that wasn't gay, but Vincent Minnelli was, and Mickey Deans was. Mickey, her last husband. Mark Herron was another one of her husbands. These were all gay guys. And Mickey Deans was the last guy that married her. And it's so awful to look at those wedding pictures because you could just see she's just bombed. And these guys are like just letched onto her, He owned nightclubs supposedly in London, but I've never heard about the nightclubs themselves. But yeah, she died in London. So she was shipped back to New York. And she was buried at Ferncliff Cemetery there in a very common grave on the ground, the lower level of the mausoleum, because it was when she died, she wasn't expecting to die. So it was what they call at need. When you go to the cemetery, you buy a grave. It's like the next one if you approve it.
Because she was only 47 she was only 47 when she died. Yeah. It was an accidental overdose, so it was unexpected, right?
Yeah. So if they had a lot of money, they could have bought something more grand. As I understand it, Sinatra paid for the funeral, and Liza went to work and paid him back every penny for the funeral and for the grave. But about 2-3 years ago, Hollywood Cemetery got her. They exhumed Judy from New York and brought her here to Los Angeles, and she's just down the street from me at Hollywood Forever Cemetery. And I think that the cemetery made a deal with the family to bring her. They pay the expenses, and the family will have a room all to their own, or one section all for Judy's family, for her kids, etc. And then everyone around it is called the Judy Garland Pavilion. So you can get cremations and go in the room with Judy. And there's all these gay guys. Oh my God, it's so funny. You walk in there and it's like poppies and ruby slippers and all these little glass front. It's cute. It is, but you're like, oh my God, so gay, so gay.
She did become a gay icon toward the end. And I can't remember, is that because, I've read about it, but I've forgotten since, is that because of Over the Rainbow, or what was, I can't remember what the reason, or was the Stonewall riots was connection,
yeah,
right?
Well, that her funeral, they always say, they defend it, saying it wasn't Judy Garland's funeral that started the Stonewall riots and the gay rights rights movement, but it just so happened it was on that day. And it's like the Queens had enough, because they were being hassled by law enforcement at the Stonewall Inn, and they decided to fight. Now, the fight was exaggerated a bit too, because people are saying I threw the first brick at Stonewall. It was like there weren't any bricks, when it was on the street in New York. It wasn't like they were just laying around bricks. But there was a revolt. There was an issue, and gay people got sick of being treated poorly, and they did fight back. So Judy was I think a gay icon before that, and it probably has to do with the Wizard of Oz, I'm sure. But also the big musicals, etc. And then there's the code word for, now, it's old, but you used to ask somebody if you think they might be gay, to clarify. You go, are you a friend of Dorothy's? And they would, that's the code word for gay. So, or was. I don't know if it's probably isn't anymore because nobody knows who that is. But for us old timers, that was a thing. Friend of Dorothy's. And she also, to be clear, Judy Garland is one of the 3 celebrities that died on the toilet. It was Lenny Bruce, Judy, Elvis. Oh, 4. Well, that Robert Pastorelli, but I wouldn't put him up there with them. But he was But Elvis was the only one actually using the toilet. But Judy died sitting on the toilet.
She was just sitting on it, using it as a seat.
Yeah,
and they said that it was ruled accidental because she had a lot of barbiturates in her system, but they, checking the lining of her stomach and everything, they determined that it had just built up over time. It was regular use, and it built up. The drug built up in her system over the course of, a day or several days, and she just didn't realize how much was in her system, and she overdosed. So it wasn't like she took a big handful of pills and did it, on purpose all at once.
Oh, it wasn't suicide. No, it was on the death certificate. It says incautious overdose. Yeah, self-overdose. But it's sad. I would say she was a live wire. She was a troubled lady, and she was taken advantage of by a lot of people, including her last husband. And it's a real shame. But what an icon, and what a movie, and Somewhere Over the Rainbow. She never ever mocked that song. She loved that song. It was her trademark, and she always sang it with everything she had. And that was pretty cool. And she could have hated it because she was expected to sing it every time she performed. Just like you had to play it, she had to do that song. Yeah, because that's what people were there for. And she could have resented it, but she didn't. It's funny that when I saw Liza at that one time, at the end of the show, she said, people ask me sometimes to sing Somewhere Over the Rainbow, and I couldn't do it. It's my mother's song. I can't do that. Yeah. So what she decided to do was to incorporate it into the act and please people and pay respect or homage to her mother. She sang a song from Peter Pan called Never Never Land. And it's a really pretty song about wanting to be young again. And at the end of it, she stopped it. She's show business. I mean, Liza didn't know what the deal is, long pause. Then she does it a cappella. Where happy little bluebirds fly beyond the rainbow, and it's like bringing down the house. I mean, people are weeping, because it was such an emotional moment. And so Liza knows the deal, but it was really cool the way that she did that. Judy could have hated it, but she really embraced, and she would never mock it. That recording that I was telling you about, Judy Speaks, when she goes, "There's no more Dorothy going over the rainbow. Dorothy is done with the rainbow. I just want my kids to be taken care of. I want money.
Right.
It's pretty.
She when you watch her perform the song in the movie, it's kind of a restrained performance. It's not belting it out like she maybe did later in her show, her live acts. It's kind of a restrained performance. And Liza said, the reason that that Judy became attached to that song and that song was her was because when she sang it, she meant every word that she was saying. And she meant it. That song really, struck a chord with her, and she made that song her song, And years ago I dated a coloratura soprano opera singer, and I remember she told me, she said, Frank Sinatra didn't have a perfect voice by any stretch of the imagination, but he meant every word. and that's why he was who he was. And I think that applies to Judy Garland when she sang that song in that movie. And they almost cut it from the movie. The studio heads thought the film was too long, and they thought this is in the first act, and it kills the momentum of the film for her to suddenly go into this song. They also, MGM was very hoity-toity with how their stars were presented, and they didn't like the idea of one of their stars singing in a barnyard in a film, and so there was a lot going against it. And can you just imagine if they hadn't used that song, if that hadn't happened?
Yeah.
And also, how many other great songs have been cut that we never got for that reason?
I remember seeing it on TV when I was a kid, thinking they could skip this song. When I go to the color, we're off to see the Wizard business. You know what I mean? As a kid, that song was like, oh my God, we got to sit through this. It was like Beauty School Dropout in Greece. It's like, oh my God. But and now in retrospect, now it's an amazing, it's an incredible song. It really is. And and the guys, Harold Arlen and the lyricist, the name will come to me. Those guys who wrote that music and those lyrics were incredible. And if you listen to We're Off to See the Wizard, and it's a cute song. But listen, I mean, this is complicated. You hear he is a whiz of a whiz, if ever a whiz there was. If ever, oh ever, a whiz there was, the Wizard of Oz is one because of the wonderful things he does. I mean, that's insane. That's like an acid trip, And it's like, that is complicated and really interesting that they came up with that. So they did an amazing job with that music on that. And that particular scene you're talking about, the whole black and white business. You probably know this, but there were 3 directors on that movie. Victor Fleming was the one who got the credit, and he did Gone with the Wind, but he left to do Gone with the Wind, and King Vidor came in and did all the black and white sequences, and then George Cukor started it, but Victor Fleming took over from him.
And Vidor said, King Vidor, who I'm a big fan of because I love Cast of Killers, which I've talked about so much, and that was based on his investigation of a famous murder in Hollywood. King Vidor, he was interviewed. They showed him in this documentary, and he, classy. He basically was like, I directed it, but I didn't want to be credited. And he goes, and I also didn't really talk about it until after Victor Fleming passed away. So while Victor Fleming was alive, I didn't want to take any credit away. But he directed, King Vidor directed Somewhere Over the Rainbow. He directed that scene. That's one of the ones he did.
Cukor started the ball rolling with the casting and the characters, and Vidor didn't start from scratch. Victor Fleming didn't nix anything. He took what Cukor did and went with it and made his own improvements, but he didn't go, screw this, I'm making it my vision. It wasn't like that. So it was kind of cool. So there was an absolute collaboration going on. And Fleming is the one who got the job done and got the credit for it. So Gone with the Wind and The Wizard of Oz in
the same year.
That's crazy. That's crazy.
And I always wondered how they did the tornado scene, because the image of the tornado in the distance and the storm and everything, it is so freaking good. Even by today's standards, it looks incredible. That twister off on the horizon. And the way they did it was they made a kind of a cylinder wrapped in muslin, and it kind of rotated, and then it was on an S-track, so that it could go back and forth, across the screen in the background. And then they had, they made little puffs of dust come out of it. And it looks so freaking good. That and the makeup and wardrobe on, the Tin Man and the Lion and the Scarecrow. I watched it again in 4K last night, and you really can see the details in their faces. And it's incredible, even by today's standards. It's really, really, really good.
We had, a couple of years ago, we went to the Chinese theater when the Munchkins got their star on the Walk of Fame. This is about 15 years ago, I think. And they were, and it was neat because, we'll talk about it in a little bit, but I knew about 5 of the Munchkins. And the Munchkins got their star on the Walk of Fame, and they were going to show The Wizard of Oz on the Chinese theater, on the IMAX screen, and they were just going on about, you're going to see every freckle on her face, every hair on her head, and you're going to be amazed by this print. It's the first time it's been seen, and oh my God, you're going to love it. And they had the shittiest, 35 millimeter, scratched up, spliced up print. I mean, it was unbelievable how bad it was. We were just like, it's comical how bad it was. It could not have been a worse print that they showed that night. And it's like, I don't know where that business came from about them doing it like that, but it was awful. But it was cool to see the movie with the Munchkins. That was neat.
Did you want to say anything else about Judy before we move on?
No, that she's at Hollywood Cemetery now, and you can visit her, and it's... she's an interesting lady.
I figured we go into Frank Morgan next.
Okay.
He was the wizard. He played 5 roles in the film. I think they said in the documentary one of the reasons he was such a big star at the time that they kind of wanted to utilize him more. But he's the wizard. He's of course Professor Marvel in reality in the real world at the beginning. He is the gatekeeper, the carriage driver, and the guard. All in different looks.
He's Oz. He is Oz.
Yeah, and of course he's the wizard. Yeah, he's the wizard.
The wizard? He's the wizard?
Yes. Don't look behind the curtain. He is the only major cast member who didn't live to see the film when it hit television. And when it actually when it first released, it released at a loss because they spent so much money making it. It didn't make money at first, and then it became legendary in 1950, starting in 1956 when it started airing on television, and that's when it found a whole new audience and people fell in love with it all over again. And Frank Morgan, who played the wizard, who played Oz, was the only major cast member who didn't live to see that because he died about 10 years after the movie was made on September 18th, 1949. He had a heart attack while filming Annie, Get Your Gun. He was only 59, and they ended up having to replace him with another actor. He died.
It's interesting because he was in the movie called Saratoga with Jean Harlow, and that was Harlow's last movie, and she died during the movie, and they had to reshoot the scenes, and it's all like it's an actress that's talking, all you see is her hat, but it's all these but he was in that movie, and so was Margaret Hamilton. They played people that were on a train together. The Wicked Witch of the West and the Wizard of Oz were in Saratoga, Jean Harlow's last movie that she died halfway through. Right. Just a weird bit of trivia. But, during, I guess it was, as I understand it, and I don't know how much of this is lore, they say that the costumes, like Frank Morgan's costume, was bought at a thrift store. And somebody, I don't know, they said they opened up the label and it said L. Frank Baum on it, and it was just a coincidence. I have my doubts about that one.
Yeah, but it's the coat he's wearing when he's Professor Marvel in the beginning, and they said it had L. Baum's name in it. It's disputed and confirmed by different people, so it's kind of up. But I agree with you; it seems a little far-fetched to believe that it. But supposedly. Baum's widow claimed that yes, it was his jacket, and I did give his clothes away to Goodwill or whatever after he died. But you're right, it is disputed, and I do find it a stretch.
But one thing that isn't a stretch, I think, I'm pretty sure it's a fact that the carriage, when he was driving the horse of a different color, they looked underneath it, and it's written on it that Lincoln was in that carriage at one point.
Oh, really?
That it transported President Lincoln. Yeah.
Wow.
But God, that whole scene, there was a whole scene that was cut out of the movie called the Renovation Scene, and that whole, but with the horse of a different color, you could see these wild, like big spiked wheels, and they were all part of this whole scene that ended up being cut, and it doesn't exist anymore. There was one song that they cut called the Jitterbug, which there's some, the music exists. And there's footage of them in the haunted forest, and because there's stuff that's ended up in the movie, like the Wicked Witch of the West, when she says, "And sprinkle a little bit of insect on them to take the bite out of them." That line is in the movie, but nobody knows what they're talking about. Well, they were jitterbugs, and these jitterbugs they were going to throw on these people. But if you must have seen the footage if you watched it when they're in the haunted forest, and you could see the guys operating the trees, and they're like up in the middle of the trees, and they're moving like this, and it's while they're dancing in the forest doing this jitterbug dance. It's really wild to see them, the special effects happening with the crazy haunted trees. Huh. There goes a tangent. Sorry, it was on a tangent.
No, I love people. I love the tangents. People, our listeners love the tangents.
But Frank Morgan Wupperman died September 18th in Beverly Hills, 1949, across the street from Brad Pitt and Jennifer Aniston's house when they were together.
Oh wow!
But yeah. Fascinating, man. You know what? One thing that bugged me about this movie, one of the things that really bugged me was when they're at Professor Marvel's and Toto grabs the hot dog off the stick. She goes, "We haven't been asked yet." It's like, well, yet? Yeah, you said that out loud. It's like, we haven't been asked yet. Like, you would just assume you're going to be asked. But, anyway, it's my thing.
Toto. All right, Ray Bolger, who was Hunk and the Scarecrow.
Yeah, Hunk, for those, I mean, everyone knows the movie. At the beginning of the movie, all the black and white bit, all the people that worked in the ranch were, transported to Oz. Hunk and Hickory and I forget the other one's name, all ended up being the Cowardly Lion and the Tin Man and the Scarecrow. So,
right.
I remember the first time when I saw the kid, when I was a kid, I was like, when I found that out, like I'd seen the movie like 4 times or 5 times already, because you only could see it once a year. That's all you could see it. Right. And then I remember hearing it was like them. And I'm like, oh my God, it freaked me out so much.
Me too. I didn't know it originally either.
That's weird.
He, I believe, was originally cast as the Tin Man, and he really wanted to be the Scarecrow. He felt like nobody else should be the Scarecrow, and he had a big dance background, and he just had all these ideas for how the Scarecrow would move and around, and the fact that he didn't have a brain, how he could do pratfalls and stuff as the character, and he ended up talking them into casting him as the Scarecrow, basically switching his roles. Lucky for him, because he didn't almost die being the Tin Man.
Well, the odd thing about that is that Buddy Ebsen was cast, Jed Clampett was cast as the Scarecrow. And then they decided to swap it and put Bolger as a Scarecrow and make Buddy the Tin Man. And then he had the accident. And
Buddy almost died.
Yeah. Because they were literally sprinkling aluminum dust all over him.
And so it would get in the air, and he would inhale it, and it got into his lungs, and it nearly killed him. He said basically that he went to breathe one day, and nothing happened. And oh, no. And they rushed him to the hospital. Yeah. And then when he was replaced by Jack Haley, they switched it from a powder to a paste so that they wouldn't have the problem of it.
Which he ended up getting an eye infection from, and he couldn't be on set for like 4 days or something for that.
There's so many accidents on set.
Yeah, I mean the stuff they were basically, they were playing with fire literally. I mean the woman that was Margaret Hamilton's stand-in did that scene with the witch riding on the broomstick, and the thing caught her on fire, and she had like 3rd-degree burns all over her body.
It was Margaret Hamilton, I believe, that actually burned in the scene when she first appears.
Yeah.
And then when she goes down the trap door and the fire comes up. Yeah. And they did the first take, which is what's in the movie, and it went fine. And then they broke for lunch, and they came back and decided to do another take, and that's when she didn't drop fast enough.
Yeah. And she was wearing flammable makeup.
Yeah, she had copper. There was copper in the makeup, and she said the only thing that saved her was the guy that was down there with her under the trap door grabbed her immediately, saw what was happening, and rushed her over and got the makeup off her face before the copper could permanently, burn her, basically. But yeah, she had 2nd-degree burns on her face and 3rd-degree burns on her hand from that, and they had to wait for her to recover from that before they could continue.
But that is the cut. They use that cut in the movie. That's the one they use.
The one that
when the trapdoor goes down. And it's a cutaway right away. But that explosion was the one where she got nailed. But so back to Bolger though. So Bolger and Jack Haley were both like studio. Same with Bert Lahr. They were like contract players,
Sure.
And Jack Haley, was sort of cast. He didn't necessarily sign up for it. He didn't audition for it. They put him into it, and all these guys were, vaudeville. That's what not vaudeville, vaudeville. That's the way they used to say it. And
Bert Lahr, if you watch him in other stuff, he was that Cowardly Lion character just naturally.
Yeah.
It's just kind of how he liked that kind of over the top way of performing was how he always was. Or had been, and it worked well with him playing an animal. They said it maybe wasn't so good with him playing a regular person, but putting that weird character that he would do and putting it in a lion, it made sense and worked better for whatever reason,
No, he was perfect. He was good. They all were really pretty good. They all were really good choices. So but Ray Bolger played Hunk. He was we went through the casting business. They say that, I don't know if it's true, that the mask that they had him wear, with a burlap pattern, they said it permanently marred his skin. his skin on his face had. I don't think that's true. That sounds a bit silly.
Yeah,
but
the only thing he said was it was so hot on set, and the mask was rubber that it closed his pores up on his face, and combined with the heat, he was miserable. He was miserable from it. But nobody was more miserable than Bert Lahr was as the Cowardly Lion, because he was wearing a 90-pound fur suit.
I mean, it was real lion skin. I mean, it was a lion skin. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, but they wouldn't let him eat with the others because they were so bizarre looking. In the commissary at MGM. And Jack Haley had to be put on a platform that was just leaning because he couldn't sit down.
The Tin Man, yeah, and he said that he was doing. I think he had a radio show, so he was doing the radio show at night, and then sleeping for a few hours basically, and then showing up at set to get in the makeup, and he would immediately pass out when they put him on that leaning board. And and one of the other actors made a joke that he could sleep anywhere, basically, because he would be instantly passed out on this kind of reclined thing. Yeah. Half standing.
Now he was the Ray Bolger ended up. He was a fixture in the '60s on TV in the '70s. He was always showing up in stuff. And I remember him on the Love Boat. Actually, I remember it because he was on the Love Boat and he was getting married. He was an older gentleman, obviously, but he was marrying the woman he was marrying. I think they met on the Titanic. And they were Titanic survivors on the Love Boat, and they thought it was bad luck to be at sea with people that were on the Titanic. It's just so funny. I mean, Ray Bolger, people were still alive and vibrant from the Titanic when they were making the Love Boat. So it's just kind of funny. Yeah. But Ray Bolger ended up. He died here in Los Angeles in 1987, and
on January 15th.
Yeah, and he's 83. He's buried at Holy Cross Cemetery, which is also where Jack Haley's buried, in the same cemetery. Yeah,
and he died from bladder cancer.
Oh, and you know what? One other thing, before we get off the Buddy Ebsen thing, when Buddy was filming before he collapsed, the only part that remained of him is he was a Winky soldier. One of the Witch's soldiers, and he shows up. The Winky scene was the first thing they ever shot. So Buddy Ebsen in the long shots of the castle is in those shots as one of the Winky guards.
Oh, that's great. He reportedly said that basically missing out on getting to be the Tin Man was his biggest regret from his career, that he didn't get to do. That he lost out on getting to do that. So that's cool that he's at least in the movie somewhere, though.
Yeah. So Jack Haley.
Sure. Who was Hickory, the ranch hand in the beginning of the film, and then the Tin Man in Oz.
Well, he was another one of those guys from vaudeville, and he was a contract player. In retrospect, only because it's become such a cult movie, and people look forward to it. So, classic. We'll call it a classic. Movie, and people always were. Looking at him like he was part of this magical production. And in retrospect, it was. But people say, it must have been so much fun making that movie. And he's like, no, it wasn't fun at all. That was hard work. It was the most unpleasant job I ever had,
Right.
But do I regret it? Not at all. And so he was... the last thing he did, actually, professionally, was in April of '79, he and Ray Bolger were on the Academy Awards together, presenting a Best Costume Award. And it was Jack Haley Jr., Jack's son, who produced the show. So there was a gag when Jack Haley opened up the envelope and Ray Bolger said, "How come you get to read the envelope?" Because my kid produced the show or something like that.
Right.
But my brother wrote Jack Haley a fan letter, and he got a response, and Jack Haley for an autograph. And he says, "Well, send me your picture. The straw man lives down the street. I'll get him to sign it too." Because he did. I mean, Ray Bolger and Jack Haley lived really close to to each other, and it's just funny. He didn't call him the Scarecrow; he called him the straw man, which I think is just interesting. That's all. But Jack Haley died in 1979.
June 6th.
Of a heart attack. And did you ever see on YouTube the Dark Side of Oz when they played The Wizard of Oz along with Pink Floyd?
So I knew about that from when I was in high school, and you used to have to time it. I think you would start the album on the third roar of the MGM Lion. Mm-hmm. That was the cue to start playing the album, and then you had to remember to repeat it because the movie was longer than the album was. And now kids today get to just have it done for them on YouTube. I have watched it, and it's weird because there's very compelling arguments that it's nonsense, that it's just coincidence, that it wasn't that Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd was not purposefully written to match up with Wizard of Oz. There's very good arguments against it, but then I watch it and it's so dang, it matches up in certain areas so well that it's almost like it was scored to the film. Mainly the tornado scene in the house, with the woman singing in the background, and then it just happens to end right as it lands, and then I think Money starts right as she opens the door and we're introduced to the Yellow Brick Road. It's perfect.
The second,
it's perfect.
And it's because there's that scene where Dorothy's singing and she looks up in the sky, and that's when you see hear helicopters and the sound and the Pink Floyd. Yes. There's a point where
when she's teetering on the fence before she falls off. There's a reference there. I can't remember what the lyric is, but there's a reference that kind of that's it. Yep.
And then there's a point where it says which is which and who is who, and there's a point where it's swap, and it's just too good. But you're right. As soon as the second she opens up the door and it becomes Technicolor, that's as soon as the cash register and the song Money.
It's like perfect, and also just because I've had some of the movies I've made scored by people, and it's hard to do. It's hard to time it up right. And the woman, singing, kind of wailing as the storm is happening, it so perfectly goes with the tone of the scene. And makes you see the scene in a totally different route. There's also another lyric during Brain Damage. Brain Damage happens around the time that she discovers the straw man, the Scarecrow in the field. And, of course, what does it start with? It starts with the lunatic is on the grass. Yes. And there's the straw man in the cornfield. Like, it's just like...
And it ends the first time the movie ends with a heartbeat. And it's just the moment she's talking to the Tin Man. And you hear just the heartbeat. So whoever said it's not it.
And then the whole scene where they're fighting, to get out of the castle, the witch's castle. I think that's when either Brain Damage or Eclipse is playing the second time around. And again, it just goes so great with the scene. It's such an uplifting, beautiful moment when they're fighting against the guards with the spears. And I don't know, man. But then the argument is basically that, that album was recorded before VHS. It was very hard. It would have been very hard, and they were touring a lot, and they were recording it in pieces. So it's not like they sat in in one of their mansions and had a copy of the film on VHS that they could play back over and over and over again in order to score to it, in order to make the album line up with it. So I get the arguments against it, that it just kind of wasn't technologically possible, and also the way that they recorded that album while kind of being on tour and doing it in pieces. It just would have been very hard to do. But then when you watch it, man, it lines up so well.
It's not accidental.
I feel like that way too.
Okay, I'm going to go off on a little trivia tangent right now. So you're talking about the wailing, and when there's that woman who's going, whoa, does that whole thing. Her name is Claire Torrey. She was one of the background singers on the Rocky Horror Picture Show. She sang on a Stones record. And so she was there's like 3 background singers in the Rocky Horror thing, but Claire Torrey, the famous one for doing that whole solo thing in what's the name of the track? I forget. It's the most famous track, where she's just wailing.
It's the great gig in the sky, I think is what it is, right?
And they're in the tornado, and it's that whole.
And it's called The Great Gig in the Sky. It's the name of the song, right?
So here's some, but it's okay. So Claire Torrey, who sang background on Rocky Horror, the Rocky Horror Picture Show is based on The Wizard of Oz loosely. The Rocky Horror Picture Show was originally supposed to be in black and white. And originally the production was the Time Warp, then Sweet Transvestite. Sweet Transvestite, then the Time Warp. So they were going to do this whole thing in black and white, and then there's a point where Tim Curry or Frank comes down the elevator, and only his lips are going to be red. And then at the end, when the doors burst open and all the Transylvanians are all in color, that was how it was supposed to be. And
so just like Wizard of Oz.
Yeah, and we're watching at the end of it how it's straight up Judy Garland business. He's wearing his platforms are ruby red. He's singing in front of a sky black background like she did when she sang "Come On, Get Happy," and it was sitting on the side just like Judy Garland used to do. There's so many Wizard of Oz references in the Rocky Horror Picture Show. It's really kind of funny in a way, but that Claire Torrey business with Pink Floyd is direct. Anyway, it was a tangent, but Mike, there's no way that can be accidental. There's no way.
It's so
in fact,
perfect.
when we finish tonight, I'm gonna do that tonight and on my TV, my proper TV, and cue it up because that is something else, man. That is the Dark Side of Oz. Look it up on YouTube.
Yes.
Pink
It's
Floyd,
so cool.
Dark Side of the Moon, and it plays along with the soundtrack of The Wizard of Oz. It's spectacular. It really is. And do it with headphones on or something,
Yes. And you mentioned ruby slippers. One quick thing about that. In the books, they were supposed to be silver slippers. But then MGM's like, man, we're shooting this in Technicolor. We can't have a neutral colored slippers. We gotta have some color pop. So that's what they changed it to ruby, so that it would be the bright red would pop in the Technicolor.
Definitely.
All right, so that was Jack Haley, Bert Lahr, who played Zeke, the ranch hand, and the Cowardly Lion.
He was one of those. He was one of those faces that was just like you just saw it and smiled. I remember he was doing potato chip commercials towards the end of his life, but just a really likable guy. He cut out really early. He died in '67, so he was one of the first cast members to expire, as it were, and didn't see the full effect of it, but enough of it on television in repeats to probably enjoy the accolades.
We talk about this a lot. They said in the documentary, one of these actors that played one of the main guys said that we're not getting any residuals for this, but it is still cool to be a part of something that continues to get all that the attention that we got from it.
Yeah. I mean, they're probably paid like $2,500 a week, maybe,
and that was it.
Yeah, I mean, the Munchkins got the dog Toto got paid more than the Munchkins did. Toto got like $125 a week or something.
Yeah, she got the Toto got $125 a week, which is $2,300 now, and I think the Munchkins were paid $50. So more than double the dog got. But
and they
that's
didn't
really
get
going to the dog's
pay,
handler, of course. But what's that?
I think they got they didn't get an extra. I think they got an extra $50 if they were flying monkeys and they had to go on the wires. They got hazard pay for that.
Hazard pay.
But they did.
Gosh.
But yeah, those guys, the makeup they had to endure. But anyway, we'll get to the Munchkins in a bit. But Bert Lahr died in '67, 72 of an internal hemorrhage.
Well, see, now there's multiple reports on how he died. One is that he died of pneumonia.
Yes, he had pneumonia.
But then he was working on a film, and he was working late nights, and it was a damp set, so some people blamed it on that because he was 72, and he shouldn't have been doing that, but they said he trusted the producers to take care of him or whatever. But then his son wrote, I think, a biography on him and claimed that it was cancer that Bert didn't know he had.
Well, I don't know. It's funny because out of all the people in The Wizard of Oz, it's the only death certificate I don't have.
Oh, really?
So I was looking for the cause of death. I'm going by what was published in the New York Times, and they said it was he'd been under treatment for a back ailment and pneumonia, but he died of a massive internal hemorrhage. Wow. But that's off a published article, not the actual document.
Sure.
But you brought up John Lahr, and John Lahr, Bert's son, is an author. And he wrote a book back in the 70s or 80s called Prick Up Your Ears, and it's about a playwright in London called Joe Orton who wrote Loot was his big play, but he and Kenneth Halliwell was his boyfriend. Kenneth Halliwell killed Joe Orton with a hammer, and then I think he killed himself, overdosed himself. But it's this play called Prick Up Your Ears was based on John Lahr's book. So Joe Orton was a slut. He was just he would hang out in bathrooms and have sex with guys like crazy. And I happen to live right by one of the restrooms in London, the public restrooms that he used to hang out in. And when they tore the place down, I got one of the glass tiles from the ceiling of this bathroom where Joe Orton used to cruise for guys. So John Lahr, I was working at the Royal Court Theater as a bartender, and he happened to be doing a book signing. So I thought, okay, I'll do this. I brought Joe Orton's tile from his toilet, and because he wrote the book, and I gave it to John Lahr, and I asked him to sign it for me. It's a weird, complicated story. But John Lahr, he wrote it. He wrote, Scott, how rude, vulgar, and totally in bad taste your unhealthy interests are. So, but the movie...
That's
the
like
movie
a slogan for Dearly Departed podcast.
No kidding. But the movie starred Gary Oldman and Alfred Molina played them both, Kenneth Hallowell and Joe Orton. It was a good movie, but it's messed up people. But anyway, so that was John Lahr, my experience with John Lahr.
Wow.
And he wrote Confessions of a Cowardly Lion, too. That was about his
really?
dad. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Billy Burke?
Billy Burke Ziegfeld.
Yes. Married at Ziegfeld and lived a life of luxury, but also was a very famous actress. She was Glinda the Good Witch. And interestingly, there is a Peg Entwistle connection with her. So Peg Entwistle, famous for jumping off the Hollywood sign, jumping off the H in the Hollywood sign in 1932 and killing herself. She was a stage actress, originally from Britain, and then had moved to New York. And she came out to L.A. to be in a play called The Mad Hopes with Humphrey Bogart before he was famous. And then the big star of the play was Billy Burke. And, of course, this was, 7 years before Wizard of Oz, but Billy Burke was already well known. And this was just a few months before Peg jumped off the Hollywood sign. She came out, and because she was in that play, Peg Entwistle got the attention of some of the studio people and ended up getting a contract with Radio Pictures, which later became RKO. And she was in a film called 13 Women. And Those Sirens Are Going By Me. And she played a character that I think had some lesbian scenes. And she ended up jumping off the Hollywood sign before the movie came out, which is probably for the best because they ended up cutting most of her scenes out because the censor boards objected to the lesbianism of her character in 13 Women. And then 13 Women got panned by the critics when it came out. But that
and
she
it
has
sucks. And it does suck. But Betty Davis said Peg Entwistle inspired her to be an actress. She saw Peg in a play. Betty Davis, 100%, absolutely. I saw Peg Entwistle on stage, and she said, "That's what I want to do." So Betty Davis, Peg Entwistle left a mark in an odd way. Not only underneath the H of the Hollywood sign, but she left a mark in show business history too.
But Peg Entwistle, her basically in some indirect way jumped off the Hollywood sign because she came out here to be in a play with Billy Burke. And there are rumors that her and Humphrey Bogart had like a little thing during the production of the play. Had a romantic.
God, could you imagine what the hell would turn somebody on about Bogart? I mean, I shouldn't say that. That's not. But I mean, really, there's. You could see. I mean, you're not a gay man, but I don't. You could see attractive, and I don't think Bogey was attractive. There was nothing about him that exudes sexuality at all. It's just sort of like. He was a great guy. He wasn't ugly, but, he's not the guy you go, whoa. He's not, no. Got to get to Humphrey Bogart.
That's hilarious.
But Billy Burke, her husband was Florence Ziegfeld, famously of the Ziegfeld Follies. And she was mostly a New Yorker, actually. Ultimately ended up living here. And she died at the Rockhaven Sanitarium, and that's where Marilyn Monroe's mother used to be kept up. Was at the Rockhaven Sanitarium. My friend Elisa Jordan. That's like out in it's like north. It's west. It's east of Pasadena, and I can't remember exactly. But my friend Elisa Jordan from LA Woman Tours wrote a book about Rockhaven. Sanitarium. It's pretty interesting, but most famously it was Maryland, and I think all those celebrity rehab shows were shot there too.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, did you hear that interview I did with Heidi Fleiss, by the way?
No, I didn't.
It's on the YouTube. I talked to her for about an hour, and
it's on your Dearly Departed YouTube channel.
Yeah. She's really interesting, a really funny lady, and no holds barred. She was great. But anyway, okay. So, but that was filmed at Rockhaven too. But Billy Burke, yeah, she was. There was that scene. Margaret Hamilton said that. I guess there was a scene when, the Munchkin Land scene, when the smoke was going up or something, when they did it the first time. And they kept telling Margaret Hamilton, go closer to whatever it was, go closer. And Billy Burke was like, it's much too hot for me. And Margaret Hamilton was like, they want me in this shit, and you're going to tell me that. But did you ever see that flaw when she's walking through Munchkin Land and Billy Burke has that big wand? It's got about 5 feet tall, and she smashes her head with it. You can hear it go tink, and you see the little things go.
Oh, really?
But but that's a little flaw in the movie.
Oh, interesting.
I love that kind of stuff. But yeah, and she Billy Burke died in, this.
May 14th, 1970, and she was 85, and it was listed as natural causes.
Yeah, myocarditis. I might have been a mistype, I don't know. But that's what it's on her death certificate.
Old person. That's the cause of death. Old.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, Margaret Hamilton?
Yeah, Margaret Hamilton. Let's get into it. Miss Gulch, who wants to steal away Toto at the beginning of the film, and then is the Wicked Witch of the West one of the most terrifying. When she's in the tornado and she sees her on the bicycle and she turns into the witch, that is terrifying. It still is. The way that has been done is like, it's creepy enough. See the lady on a rocking chair knitting and stuff like that. But that was terrifying, and that crazy laugh that she had was something else, man. She was very good at being the witch, and also had her share of maladies on the set too, because she, the green makeup, like you said, caught on fire. She had there was a couple of other incidents involving her. Now I can't remember off the top of my head what they were, but it wasn't a pleasant shoot. Again, it was a real rough shoot, and the green makeup. She said her face was green for months afterwards because it had seeped in so deeply. I mean, why didn't all these people just die of cancer? You know what I mean? It's like sitting at, watching the atomic bombs going off, outside of Vegas. And then going to film a Western there. Exactly, right.
Yes. So it's sort of funny that, but she was, and she was an interesting lady too. She was, as I mentioned, she was in Saratoga with Frank Morgan, and she also was in an Abbott and Costello movie called Coming Around the Mountain, in which she plays like a gypsy witch making voodoo dolls, and it is just her. It is Margaret Hamilton being the witch. The witch. Right. It was pretty interesting, and she used to do that for Halloween. She used to do the witch cackle for kids when they came trick or treating to her house.
Yeah, and she loved the line, "I'll get you my pretties," and she reportedly would say that all the time. Or she would, if she wanted to, if she was scolding her dog, her pets or whatever, she would say, "I'll get you my pretties." It was like one of her, was like her favorite line from the movie.
She was. I mean, it was great. She said it terrified kids when she started doing that laugh and that cackle. She was on She was on an episode of Mr. Rogers where she has a witch's hat, not and he tries it on too. And she was also, there was some, I think it was called the Paul Lynde Halloween special that she was on. And they all played witches. I think Billy Burke was there, who was Billy Hayes, who was in H.R. Puff and stuff. And they all played all these witches. Paul Lynde in drag as his witch, and Margaret Hamilton. It was another one of those amazing, like, this is a 70s moment, like a Love Boat show with all these old stars. But yeah. And so Margaret Hamilton, and then at the end she was doing coffee commercials. And people were saying, that's the Wicked Witch of the West when she's doing the Maxwell House commercials, playing Cora. That was interesting. Yeah, so she had another career as another household name on these commercials in the 70s, in the 80s. So she was one of the ones that did have something else to do. And she died in Salisbury of a heart attack and heart disease. She had a fractured pelvis. She fell on April 18th, 1985. She fell again on May 2nd and died ultimately on May 16th.
1985, and she had also reportedly suffered from Alzheimer's the last few years as well.
She was offered the role of Grandmama on The Addams Family, and she turned it down. Yeah.
Oh, she would have been great though too.
She would. Well, she ended up playing Morticia's mother in 3 episodes. but but the part went to Blossom Rock. I guess she didn't want to do another wacky witch character, but But yeah. But she made her mark.
Okay, so Uncle Henry.
Yeah, Charlie Grapewin was his name, and both he and Clara Blandig were both studio players really, and they got hired. And their participation was minimal, probably 2 days on set kind of a thing, but iconic. Annie M. I mean, that's such a thing. And Charlie Grapewin, he was 86 when he died, and he was 100 years old when he was in the movie. It was. Right. And but he died in 56 on February 2nd of bronchitis. He's buried at the Great Mausoleum at Forest Lawn. Also in the Great Mausoleum at Forest Lawn is Clara Blandig, who played Auntie M. And she was, very interestingly, committed suicide in 1962 by pulling a plastic cleaning bag over her head and suffocating herself. After she went to church and she put on a nice dress and she surrounded herself with photographs from her career. And sat down in her favorite chair and put a bag over her head.
Oh my God! And that was in that's at an otherwise also famous location, correct?
Well, it's on Wilcox, and it's a new building now. But they were called the Dolly sisters. They died there too. They were show business, old show business stuff. But yeah, and it was right by the Lido where Victor Killian died. It was right by the Hotel California. Carol Burnett grew up across the street. The Hotel California album, the exteriors of the Beverly Hills Hotel, but the interior is the lobby of the Lido, which is right across the street. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So she's in the forest. She's at the Great Mausoleum too, which is interesting. Both Uncle Henry and Auntie M and L. Frank Baum are buried, and Judy Garland's parents are actually at Forest Lawn, Glendale as well. Yeah.
And in preparation for this show, I bought The Wizard of Oz in 4K a long time ago, or at least earlier this year, and never watched it. I still had the seal, the plastic wrap around it, so I broke it open and watched it last night. And I hadn't seen the movie in years, and I didn't realize M is short for Emily.
Mm-hmm. He says that, doesn't he?
At some point in the film, she says she calls her Emily. Yeah, I didn't realize that. That's cool. Okay.
And then you got Toto.
Well, okay, so Toto was a dog named Terry. He was a cane she. It was a she, by the way. She was a cane terrier, and her owner, her dog handler, was a movie dog, a movie animal wrangler, and I believe took the dog. It was a dog that had been boarded with him and had been left there, or they owed him money and left the dog as money or something like that. And the dog ended up acting in 16 films Terry was in. And in 1942, they changed her name from Terry to Toto because the film was such a big success. And Terry passed away on September 1st, 1945 at the old age of 11, which was 77 in dog years. And her grave, she was buried there on the ranch that her owner owned, and her grave was destroyed when they built the Ventura Freeway in, I believe, 58. But there is a memorial for her at Hollywood Forever Cemetery.
Right. Yeah, my buddy Steve Goldstein was an integral part of getting that memorial put up. But yeah, Toto's under the 101.
Right.
Carl Spitz was his name because he's buried in the Great Mausoleum too. Toto's trainer.
The dog handler. Yeah,
and he used to
technically he was the one that got $125 a week, not Toto.
Right. But he was my fake name at the Great Mausoleum. Great Mausoleum is like, I hate the term Holy Grail is always overused, but the Great Mausoleum is like the place. It's like the chapel for grave hunters. That's where it's hard to crack the place. It's like an Escher drawing, stairways and doorways and upwards, downwards. But that's where you'll find Clark Gable and Carol Lombard and Sid Groman and Jean Harlow and the Andrews sisters and Walt Disney's parents are in there. W.C. Fields. So it's like and Michael Jackson's in there now. So it's a really famous little place and. to get in there should be really hard work. It is too now with Michael Jackson, and there's other sorts of doors in other places. And if you know where the cameras are, this was serious. This was science back in the 80s, where you knew where the cameras were, you knew where to scale the wall so you could get away from the cameras. But Carl Spitz was the name I used to use to get in, and was Toto's trainer, and then we would kind of maneuver the Great Mausoleum that way. It was Buster Keaton, Lon Chaney's in there. Oh my God, there's so many amazing people in that cemetery, in that mausoleum. And Elizabeth Taylor, my God, she was just put there too.
And that's at Forest Lawn, right?
Forest Lawn, Glendale, right. So that was Toto. Got paid more than the Munchkins did.
He did. Well, his handler did, yeah, certainly. And Toto was also injured on set.
Yeah?
One of the Winky guards during a take accidentally stepped on her foot and broke it. And she convalesced with Judy Garland for a couple of weeks while her foot repaired. And Judy got very connected, to the dog as a result of that.
Oh, I've never heard that story. It's interesting.
While it mended. Yeah, supposedly.
It's funny now that you mentioned that, because there's a scene where she's singing over the rainbow and the dog lifts up his paw. Just yeah. So that
he keeps lifting it up afterward after they do the little paw thing. Yeah. So I wonder if that's what that was. I don't know.
God, that movie was so good. I mean, I sort of always hesitated to not like it because it's such a gay thing, and I just didn't want to be, it's like, can't, because I don't like enforcing stereotypes. But that movie is brilliant, and the special effects are amazing, and that whole Munchkin Land scene is just off the hook. It's insane. Those 138 of those little people. Well, then there were 4 children that were in there somewhere, and just the color, and oh my God.
So let's talk about the Munchkins. So yes, there were for the deep background, they hired some children to play kind of super far off in the distance background players, and then it was of course little people for the main Munchkins. And they if you look, each Munchkin has a totally individualized wardrobe and hair and makeup going on. There was nothing repetitive. The wardrobe people came up with unique looks for every single Munchkin, which is really fascinating. They were put up in the Culver Hotel, which is a famous hotel. It's still there in downtown Culver City, which, if you read the literature on the hotel there, that was John Wayne won the hotel from Charlie Chaplin in a poker game. And I have heard that if you want to stay at the Culver Hotel, you can request the John Wayne suite, and you can still see in the floor the mounts from where he had a rotating bed installed. So it was like one of his sex pads was at the Culver Hotel, which he won from Chaplin in a poker game. And they were supposedly I heard that they were transported, because the Culver Hotel is just right down the street from MGM lot, from the old MGM lot. It's a short trek. And I heard that the Munchkins were loaded up just into flatbed trucks, basically, and driven down there. But then I've also heard that they were. But then I've also heard them say that one of them said that the last one to pass away, I can't remember his name,
Jerry Marin,
but. Yes, I believe he said that he made a reference to getting on the bus and seeing all the Munchkins on the bus, and that, because especially back then, if you were a little person, you were kind of the only little person you knew, or maybe a few family members around. But that was what was so exciting for them, was there were 138 of them, I think you said. All of a sudden, they're all together for the first time ever, and he's just like, there. I'm looking at all these other little people, and I'm watching how they walk. And it was the first time I'd ever been, around other people that looked like me, basically. And there's all kinds of stories of debauchery with them, and it's a lot of it exaggerated, some of it perpetuated by Judy Garland and others.
But they did. You're right, though. They met their mates. So many people met because they'd never seen other little people. So you're right. They got married. They had relationships. They had children. So it was important, because a lot of those were like from Eastern Europe. They were the Singer midgets. Leo Singer brought him over, and he was.
And some of them were refugees. They got away from Nazi Germany because the war broke out big time. That following year, at least for the U.S. So a lot of them were refugees that escaped the Holocaust. that was unfolding in Europe, and yeah.
There was I don't know if it was before or after the Wizard of Oz that they made the Terror of Tiny Town, it was all midget western, and and a lot of the Munchkins ended up in that movie. It's just fascinating.
The Terror of Tiny Town.
Yeah, you ever heard of that?
No.
It's one of it's voted one of the worst movies ever, but it's fascinating because it's like a bunch of Munchkins, and like the very first Munchkin that shows up when the house lands and Glinda starts singing "Come out, wherever you are." The very first one that comes out, her name was Fern Formica, and I met a ton of these people over the years because I used to go to these things where all the Munchkins were. So Fern was the first one, and she plays a dance hall girl in The Terror of Tiny Town, and she was like a little Lucy. I mean, she was a chain smoker, and she's like with the red hair. She was great. Fern was a piece of work. And then there was Margaret Pellegrini, who was one of the flower pot ones with the flower pot on her head, but she was also one of the sleepyheads that were in the eggs that, to wake up you sleepyheads and they burst out of their eggs. Mm-hmm. So Margaret Pellegrini was in that. Jerry Marin, of course, famously the lollipop guy, who was the last living little person, Munchkin. And he died just about 2 years ago, I think. And he'd been in my shop. He was, this guy. He'd been in everything. He'd been Bewitched. He was in Lost in Space. He entertained at Jimmy Stewart's, bachelor party. Jerry Marin did a ton of stuff. And yeah, he was the last. He was Buster Brown when Buster Brown was a live person, and the Oscar Mayer Wiener guy. I think he was for a while.
Wow.
So Jerry Marin was a good guy. In fact, Margaret Pellegrini, the one I just talked about. No, Jerry Marin had been in the shop, so he in the old dearly departed tour shop. And Margaret Pellegrini was in my old apartment in Hollywood, and she peed in my toilet, and I took the toilet seat with me. In that apartment, it was like a Munchkin peed in my toilet.
You really do have a whole bathroom that you could outfit with everything that you have. Yeah,
That's
Judy
true,
Garland's sink.
Yes.
You got a Munchkin toilet seat.
But then there was Margaret Fern, Meinhardt Robbie. Meinhardt was the coroner. He's the one that held the death certificate, and he didn't sing. None of those people really sang. When you hear those voices, those were session singers. None of them really sang. Those sped up voices. But he's the one that did, as coroner of whatever. I thoroughly examined her, and there was another guy by the name of. Mickey Carroll, who claimed to be the coroner. See, this is also the weird thing about the Munchkins. So they used to claim they were bigger parts than they were. And,
right.
So Mickey Carroll...
Because they all had weird hair attachments to them, prosthetics and stuff, so they could claim, I was that guy, right?
Yeah, exactly. No one's going to say no, except for the people now, that were really that person. But Mickey, in fact, Mickey was selling coffee mugs with him as the coroner, which he wasn't, with Judy Garland, saying the coffee mug said Mickey and Judy on them. He was a nice guy, but he, they were all just. And Carl Slover, he was one of the trumpeters or a soldier, I forget which one. He took my tour like 20 years ago, and he just fell asleep during it. But he was just like snoring. But
did you keep the chair he fell asleep on?
No, it was in the old hearse.
Oh.
But Meinhardt Robbie, who was the coroner, he lived in Florida, and he accidentally killed his wife a couple of years before he died. He ran her over accidentally. They're quite elderly, these people, and,
right.
And sometimes that kind of stuff happens with people that are older and aren't, that don't have their reflexes like they used to. So he accidentally killed his wife a couple of years before he died. But he was a nice guy, and most of them were the ones that I met were pretty nice people. They all had good stories, and they always entertained it. What was cool was that when Steve wrote, in fact, I had the book here. This is my friend Steve's book. It's called The Munchkins of Oz. And he tracked down every Munchkin. He found all the children Munchkins. He interviewed all the ones who were alive, the Lollipop Kids and
right.
the Lullaby League and everybody. He tracked every single one of them down, and their own recollections. It's pretty interesting stuff. And so the other most famous Munchkin, I think, was one of the Lollipop guys, Harry Dahl. And Harry Dahl was the star of the movie Freaks. He was the lead in the movie Freaks. And his sister, Daisy Dahl, was his love interest in Freaks. So the brother and sister were playing love interest in the movie Freaks. And but there was also two other Dahl family members. There was Tiny Dahl, who I corresponded with briefly, and I forget the other ones. But they were the traveling Dahl family. They were from Germany, East Germany, and they did the sideshow circuit as the little family. And they were Munchkins. We talked about this in other shows, but not here. But Munchkins are midgets, are perfectly proportioned little people. Their arms and their legs are like average people are, whereas dwarfs are, a little bit different, and their legs would maybe not be as long as their arms and their internal organs and their heads. So it's a medical term, but it is the way it is. So Munchkins were hired specifically because they were perfectly proportionate little people. And and then the others, like when they did Under the Rainbow, that spoof movie with Chevy Chase about how the Munchkins misbehaved, they were mostly dwarfs in that movie, so they weren't even in, they didn't represent them the right way. But anyway, Freaks is an interesting association with the Wizard of Oz. So Harry Dahl,
and of course Freaks had Pinhead, Schlitzie, who you have tattooed on your arm.
Yeah, but Schlitzie's tombstone,
who you then helped raise the money to get a tombstone for Schlitzie, yep. I feel like I read years ago that there was like a community in Florida that a lot of them retired to. Yeah, the little people. It was kind of like a trailer park type of a situation or something like that, and a lot of them kind of ended up in the same little neighborhood.
Yeah, it's called Gibson Town, or Gibtown for short, and where the circus people would go off season. And and so like the lady who owned the resort there, her name was Jeannie Tomani, and she was a half woman, and her husband was a giant. And Grady Stiles, who was the lobster man, that's where he got murdered. It's a fascinating story. It's called The Lobster Boy, and he got murdered by his family. And they have the Showman's Hall of Fame there. It's they have the hairy lady used to live there. I mean, they all lived in this little town, and so did the Dahl family. They all retired to a little place, Sarasota, nearish to there, in Gibson Town. And unfortunately, none of them are left. None of the old sideshow people are left. But it's still a cool place. It's still a really cool place. And then
the three guys that were the Lollipop Guild that kind of sang that song, I think I read years ago that they said that they were cast for that part in the film basically on the set. That basically the filmmakers went down the line and said, sing the song. Okay, now you sing the song. Now you sing the song. And kind of like, okay, these are the three best ones. And they basically picked them on the spot and then filmed that moment.
I have no doubt of that.
The little jerky kicks that they did while they were singing, and makes sense.
And the girls,
what a huge undertaking! What's that?
The girls, like they had to be ballet dancers, the little lullaby people. They had to be able to dance on their little shoes. But you're right. They
must
just
have been
assigned it on the
dancers,
day. They got fitted, but they just assigned it on the day, or before the production.
I wonder. It must have been a huge undertaking for the casting people to find all those people.
Well, see, most of them were part of that troupe called the Singer Midgets that were a sideshow troupe, and they got a vast majority of them that way.
That makes sense.
He collected them in Europe, and basically a lot of people sold their kids to him. I mean, he was like their legal guardian because nobody wanted the little people.
Yeah, and he got like 50% of their fee or something like that. I
Probably.
think he took an exorbitant amount of money of percentage of what they got paid.
The midgets never talked bad about him. They never said anything negative about Leo Singer. They just said, he treated us well. We'd still be in some, shitty farm. I don't know, whatever.
Yeah, sure.
But he screwed them over, or however you want to define it or word it.
Yeah.
They never talked bad about him.
Right, because he may have taken a big percentage, but it still benefited them enough that their lives
came to America.
Better.
Right, that's where they. Yeah. So.
I get that.
But, so all the Munchkins now, except for the children, there's, I think, 3 women that are left that are still alive. But otherwise, all the adult cast members, everyone's gone from that show. And the credits, at the end of the credits, all the principals are mentioned, and then there's one character called Nico, and the character's credited Pat Walsh. So I'm like, it's supposed to. And I looked it up. This is decades ago. We were looking this up. Nico was actually the lead monkey that Margaret Hamilton, would with her all the time.
Would talk to. Yeah, I get that.
Yeah. But so Pat Walsh gets a credit. None of the Munchkins do, but Pat Walsh, the lead monkey, gets a credit. No lines, just maybe a bit of acrobatics.
Featured extra, really, yeah.
Yeah, but no real screen time on his own, so could have been anyone in every scene. But it's just interesting that Pat. So when he died, he was buried at Westwood Cemetery. But then that is another. Nobody's ever found it. Nobody knows where he's buried. But it's always been Pat Walsh who played Nico, who you had to look up to find that. It's supposed to be at Westwood. Never found him. But that's weird that he gets screen credit. Of all those Munchkins don't, and just interesting.
That always intrigues me in older films because nowadays, at least in film, television is still credits are still kind of guarded because there's limited space. But films now, they give away credits like candy. But back then, it was much more, there was a higher bar you had to meet to get a credit.
The craft services didn't get a credit.
Get a credit, The 1,000 people who worked on effects didn't get credits like they do now.
Accounting, and not belittling any of that. But.
Marvel movies, literally 3,000 people get credited on them. But back then it was like, a few dozen got it. So, that's interesting.
Yeah. Now, there's the urban legend about the Munchkin being hanged on the set.
Yes.
And that's a good story.
Yeah.
And it also dates back to when the movie was only shown on TV and you only got a glimpse of it,
And it was shitty resolution. It was not good. Like it was, standard definition. So it wasn't like what we have now. And it was a crane. It was a bird, a crane bird that was there in other shots, and it was in the background. And it's funny because I investigated it last night, and watching it in 4K, it so obviously is a crane. Yeah. I don't even understand how it could have been, but I guess
it kind of twists and does a wing like that. It's weird looking, and I don't know how you get someone.
Because they start skipping toward it, and that's what the director said. He's like, look, the actors are skipping toward the bird, and the bird kind of reacts and kind of puts its wings out, and that's what left to it. And I could see if you're watching it on a crappy VHS recording, it's bad resolution, and you might, it's this weird shape in the background. It looks like someone hanging. But what's funny is it's in the middle of the shot. There's no way somebody hung themselves on a set where literally hundreds of people are working on, and it's in the center of the shot, and somebody wouldn't have noticed. Hey, there's a dead person hanging on our set, But it is funny how it became. It's like is it 3 Men and a Baby or 3 Men and a Little Lady where people claim to see the ghost, and then it turns out it's actually like a cutout of a person that's a part of set decoration. Yeah, that's actually seen.
And there's like recordings where they, like pop songs from the 70s where, somebody was murdered in the background. You can hear them scream,
Right.
It goes back to like Paul is dead and all that kind of business. But yeah, so that's a story that's often repeated about for as many interesting moments on that set as there were behind the scenes. A Munchkin did not hang themselves on the set. There weren't even any Munchkins in that scene, too. But anyway,
right. And it's funny because the internet has kind of killed urban legends, right? Because they get debunked so fast. And it used to be like growing up in the 80s, man, an urban legend would live on for years and years and years because there was no collective space to go to for people to debunk it. Yeah. So we all just spread this stuff, you know what I mean? And things still spread on the internet, rumors and stuff, but they also get debunked very fast.
Snopes.com,
right, exactly. Yeah, researchers dig in and kill it. Yeah.
So, how movie memorabilia has become a thing, big thing in recent years.
Right.
When the studio system was overturned and all the actors became free agents, MGM, I think it was 1976 or 75 or 74, I remember what year it was, cleared out their archives, all their costumes. They were just put them out on tables. You were pawing through stuff, and there were swords from movies and costumes from movies.
Yep.
And there was this guy who worked at MGM who actually was freelance. He was a costumer. His name was Kent Warner. And Kent Warner was working at Warner Brothers, and I guess they gave him a task of burning costumes. This is the legend, anyway. And supposedly he took a an overcoat to the incinerator, and he happened to look in it, and it said Bogart, and it was the Casablanca overcoat. So he's like, okay, I'm a costumer. This is my thing. I get this. This is important. So he started looking for things. He started finding stuff that he wanted to find. His holy grail, again, there's that word again, but his thing that he wanted to find was the witch's broomstick. So when he went to MGM, he found one of these old barns. The roof was rotted out of it, and he found like this whole row. He found the witch's hat, the original one, which he kept, and he found a lot of the Munchkin costumes, and he found the ruby slippers in a box, just wrapped in cloth.
Wow.
So okay, but
which
this
are worth
is where it
millions
gets
of
really
dollars.
interesting. So but thing is, Kent Warner found 2 pairs. And he kept the nicest pair for himself. And MGM auctioned the other pair. And it went for an astronomical amount of money, which at that point was about $15,000. So, okay, after all this fuss over this auction, this man bids $15,000, which in the 70s was a lot of money. Turns out there's a school teacher in Indiana who reaches out and says, oh, I have a pair. And everyone's like, wait, what? She goes, yeah, I won it. When the movie came out, I did a little quiz thing, and I won it, and they sent me a pair. Well, it turns out that the guy that bought the auction pair, they were mismatched pairs. And this woman in Indiana had the other mismatched pair. So the guy who bought the pair, so the guy that bought the pair at the auction, they're the pair that are in the Smithsonian.
Right.
So then Kent Warner has the nicest pair for himself. There's an auction pair. There was another pair that had curly toes that he sold to Debbie Reynolds, because Debbie Reynolds used to collect these shoes. And because he would go, I mean, when Betty Davis was doing the Smothers Brothers show, he went and found her Queen Elizabeth, which she won an Academy Award, found her costume and gave it to her backstage as a joke. Or not as a joke, but just like, here's something. And, it would just, Debbie Reynolds was paying him to go steal stuff, like her costume from Singing in the Rain. And he'd meet her at that parking lot behind the Rite Aid at Fairfax and Sunset at night.
No
and
kidding.
They'd sell him out of the trunk of his car. And she'd say, now I want this. Can you get this? And not in a nasty way, because these things were being, destroyed.
Yeah, they're being ruined, so they're saving them. Right.
Right. So there was another pair of slippers, and about 10 years ago, we're at the Judy Garland Museum in Grand Rapids, Minnesota, and they were stolen. Somebody broke into the museum and stole the ruby slippers. And so this has been like a whodunit for 10 years. People were claiming that they had them, and they didn't have them. Somebody thought that they were in a lockbox at the bottom of a body of water. And divers were sent down to look for them.
I remember hearing about that. Yeah.
So ultimately, less than a year ago, a buddy of mine, actually, on my Facebook, a buddy of mine was involved with the investigation, and there was a sting operation, and the FBI set it up where there was a guy that was going to sell him the ruby slippers, and they set it up and had a meeting in a cafe, and boom, they got him back. So the FBI has that stolen pair, and the case hasn't been solved or hasn't been closed yet. But then there's this other mysterious pair, and I think they're the pair that Kent Warner had, the prettiest pair, the one with the close-up when she clicks her heels. That was the pair that he had, and they were going to auction, and those are the ones that Leonardo DiCaprio bought and donated to the Academy Museum, so they'll be on display. So there's like 7 pairs of ruby slippers that this guy found and took, but if it wasn't for him, they would have been destroyed a long time ago. So,
it's like
Kent Warner...
One studio's trash is a film fan's treasure, basically.
I mean, but that's beyond treasure. I mean, that is like insane. I mean, they're priceless. Now they're priceless. Back then, it was like MGM was selling swords from Gladiator or whatever it was for $15.
We got thousands of these things. Who cares?
Yeah.
Exactly. Even today, when I was at Sony Pictures, they when you went into the gift shop in the middle of this thing, every week they would put usually 3 items up for sale that were either costume or prop related.
Oh, really?
To film and television. And most of it was stuff you didn't really care that much about, right? It was minor films and stuff like that. But every once in a while, something really cool. And it was an auction. You would bid. You would write down, there was a piece of paper there, you could bid on it, and then you might win. And I actually won. I got a Los Pollos Hermanos cup from Breaking Bad, an actual screen-used cardboard cup
fun.
With Los Pollos. And that was the one thing I bid on that I got. And I tried to get the costume from Looper. I tried to get one time and I got outbid on. But anyways, it's kind of a similar thing, right? It's kind of they have so much stuff that's taking up space, and
I mean, there were literally
now
holes
it means
in
more.
the roof
Now
of that
it means
thing.
more than it did back then originally, right?
Yeah.
It was just stuff.
I mean, the original costumes for the Wizard of Oz were getting rained on, and this guy went and took these tattered clothes and these things are, oh my God, and they a few costumes. I know there's Munchkin costumes. I know that Bert Lahr's costume is around because I know that somebody sold one of the feet from his costume, and I knew a dentist had the pelt, and I know that
and it was kind of beat up. It was really beat up, and they were going to restore it or something like that. I remember reading something about that years ago. Yeah.
And the courage medal that he had, that's still around. And no one's been able to find Jack Haley's funnel hat. But I do know that the hourglass, the witch's hourglass, exists.
Oh wow!
The one that she didn't throw, but that belongs to some people.
Years ago, there was a big Wizard of Oz auction. I remember like some of the spears from the guards were being sold, and those were expected to go for tens of thousands of dollars. And yeah,
I did get to do that. I got to put one of the witch's hats on my head and carry a spear once when I was on the Tammy Faye Baker show, and a collector came in with a couple of the Munchkins. It was with Tammy J and Jim J or whatever his name was. But yeah, I got to put a witch's hat on my head with one of Winky's spears. That was pretty cool.
That's awesome.
At Tammy Faye Baker, and that was a great day. But anyway, on that happy note. But yeah, I think we've exhausted this movie. I think so. I think I've touched on most everything. Oh, the only thing I will say is that there's a rumor that Shirley Temple was originally cast as, they wanted Judy Garland.
That's in the documentary. That's even in the documentary that they were looking at.
I think it's a bit blown out of proportion. I think they probably considered her because she was a big star, but Fox wasn't going to lend her out. So, with the success of The Wizard of Oz, 20th Century Fox made their version of The Wizard of Oz called The Bluebird. And Shirley Temple is the star of this movie. And Gail Sondergaard, who was supposed to be the Wicked Witch of the West, but ended up not getting, Margaret Hamilton got the star as this bad character in their version of 20th Century Fox. The Bluebird is a crazy movie. Shirley Temple plays the nastiest little girl ever. She's vile. I mean, she's nasty to people. And they after this, that's why no one's ever seen the movie, because they never promoted it after this. Because Shirley Temple's supposed to be this goody, lovely little girl. She's nasty. And in this movie, it's bizarre because she's this bad little girl, and she ends up going to sleep or something and ends up in this dreamland and finding all her old dead relatives. She's sitting on a porch with her dead grandmother and father, and then she gets transported to this land with these children that aren't born yet. And it is the most twisted, messed up, crazy movie. It's really good. It's probably on YouTube too, but it's called The Bluebird. And in the special effects, there's a guy that turns into a cat. There's a guy that turns into a dog. There's a woman that turns into a cat. She's the evil one. And it's colorful, fascinating, bizarre. And one of the little girls that wasn't born yet that's in the movie, her name is Carroll Eklund, and she was 4 years old, and she died like 2 days after Halloween because her costume caught on fire from a pumpkin.
Oh wow.
And that's one of the weird trivia bits about this movie too. But The Bluebird, if you get a chance to see it, it's Warner Brothers version or their reaction to
I've
The
seen
Wizard of Oz,
clips from it, and it's
good.
weird. It's like
It's good.
looking at like the Star Wars knockoffs that came after Star Wars came out, and every studio wanted their own Star Wars, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of, it looks like that. You're like, oh, I can kind of see what they were trying to go for the Wizard of Oz vibe, but it just didn't have the magic.
Right. Yeah. So, but it's a good movie. Only that is so freaky, and to watch Shirley Temple be nasty, it's really good.
So what I saw, I think on the documentary, was that they considered Shirley Temple, but the song, I believe it was the guys that wrote the music, combined with the director, decided that she didn't have the chops to do musically what they needed to have done, whereas Judy Garland could do it, And also Shirley Temple was quite a bit younger. She was only like 11 at the time, whereas Judy Garland was like 16, 17. So
but
Judy Garland,
I think Dorothy was like 11. I think the character of Dorothy is that young, and Judy they had to
younger,
like
and
cinch
Judy
her.
played down. But it's to have an actress that's a little more mature and can handle the challenges of the role that they didn't feel like Shirley Temple could quite pull it off.
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah.
Well, cool. I think we covered it. I think
Did
we're
we
good.
do it?
That's a lot.
Okay.
There's a lot of information.
Well, everybody, we're going to try. This is November 2nd that we're recording this on. The big election is in America tomorrow in the U.S., November 3rd, and we're going to try to release this on Election Day.
Let's go. I wish I wish we were going to Oz. I want that happy Technicolor world. I'd rather hang out with the Wicked Witch than what's going on in the world right now,
I know, it's crazy.
I want to go to the happy place where people sing, and even the bad people sing, and that's just...
And can be defeated by water.
Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching, if you're watching this, and we really appreciate it. And stay sane, be good to yourselves, and be happy.
Yes. See you next time.